Triple header for Formula One. Midway through it, we make our way to Mexico with some of the best fans and with one of the greatest atmospheres on our 2024 F1 calendar. We make our way to the Mexico City GP. The track itself is very unique, being super high up in altitude and making for a very difficult circuit that's given us quite a few moments to talk about. A moment between the finish Bottas and Raikkonen in 2017, there was a pretty heavy crash on turn 5, destroying both their races, and some people theorized this was a payback from the Russian GP. But it was never actually clarified, but a pretty interesting moment from this GP. The 2021 first turn drama was also unique. Plenty of drivers going off. It's a very hard corner to nail, especially on that first turn, and a lot of different lines can be taken, and making up positions in Mexico is very important because it is a wide track, but overtaking can be pretty difficult at times. Lewis did also end up winning his 4th championship here in 2017. And 2023 actually provided a pretty good race with Lando Norris cutting through the field. But we also can't forget, and while it wasn't a very memorable GP, it's because Max Verstappen made it that way. He is still on those soft tires nowadays because of how long he was on that stint. The consistency was impeccable and Max was just unstoppable. This is and always has been a very good track for Red Bull, which I'll definitely talk about later on in the video. But as I stated before, there's 2 different layouts that Mexico has used, and there's a little bit of different variations throughout the years. The main ones that I want to talk about is this specific layout, and then after returned in 2015, which is the layout that we currently have nowadays. And as we're looking at this, specifically I pulled this up from the 1990 Mexico GP. This is what the track used to look like. I think if we had this track, the racing here in Mexico would be phenomenal. And as you can see, there are similarities. The 1, 2, 3 going into 4, 5, and 6 is exactly the same, with 7 and 8 being just a tad bit different. 9, 10, 11 still have that S section. 12 and 13 are not too dissimilar, but it's more of a sharper cut, 12 to 13 in the current track that we have, which then goes into the stadium section. And I know that a lot of people talk about this section being a phenomenal section to see the Formula One cars, but they go as fast as my Honda Civic here. So it's not very memorable, especially on the TV, and it makes for the race being very stagnant at times. It's something that Mexico definitely lacks, and strategy can play a big part here because overtaking is very difficult because the cars have very little downforce to them because of the altitude. I do think it's possible to revert back to this. I wish we would. This would be a phenomenal track. But to talk about it, and not to give it too much hate, as I said, the atmosphere and the fans make up for it. There's always huge emotion here. We saw that when Checo crashed out in 2023, and I love seeing some passionate fans. We see that in Silverstone, we see it in Texas. Brazil is another one of those tracks. Mexico, when you can hear the roars over the TV, I think that can make up for a track being a little dull at times. But we are going here with the softest section of tires, and I think that is the correct call because it's a track that doesn't have too much tire wear. It is only a 2 on the tire stress. It's got 3 on traction, which I think that differentiates from year to year. They're obviously going with the softest compound, so traction is going to go up, but the grip of the asphalt is a 2. Braking is a 3, and it could be even higher, but with the amount of downforce they actually have on these cars, you don't have to brake as hard. You're pretty much using a Monaco spec of car here with a lot of cooling, which also throws off the flow over the car and can make for a very difficult race. So that's where we see a 5 out of 5 for downforce, as much as Monaco pretty much maxed out. And the track evolution is a 5 on this track because it really does require you to be perfect and wait till the very end to put in a great lap. Also, typically the teams that have the best aero efficient cars do the best here. It's not about engine, it's not about who has the best drag reduction. It's pretty much the most efficient, most effective cars in aerodynamics. But with that, we can talk about a lap around Mexico. Let's go over this very unique track. There's nothing else like it because of the altitude And the way that it's set up, it's unique to itself. You can't compare it to anything else. Starting off, what is one of the biggest straights on the F1 calendar at a very high altitude. On the start-finish line, we have a DRS zone. Overtakes mainly happen going here into turn 1, which will be a very difficult break, but you want to go as left as possible to then nail the exit going into turn 2, setting up turn 3 for yet another straight. And this DRS section is still aligned with the first DRS zone. So if you get it in the first part, you also get it in the second part. I also disagree to this being on the track. It doesn't make for a lot of back and forth action between this first sector. And that ends off the first sector going into a hard braking zone into turn 4 and 5. Very difficult, slow traction. You want to get on power as fast as possible, but then you got to be very tricky going into turn 6 where you want to go as left as possible, shortening out the corner, prioritizing the exits, going into now the S sector of 7, 8, and 9. Very difficult, should look a lot faster, but it's pretty slow because of downforce levels, which then goes into 10, which isn't too hard of a braking zone, but a little light brake should definitely happen. Turn 11 is flat out, going into 12, which is one of the hardest zones to actually get down. Track limits do tend to happen here in qualifying, but then we go into that stadium section that I was talking about, which is turns 13, 14, 15, and then getting into 16 to then end off this curved off lap. You want to go as left as possible to get the best traction possible to either overtake or finish your qualifying lap, which is finishing a lap in Mexico. And while this track goes by quickly, it's a long GP because there's a lot of laps. But as I said, a lot can happen because tire strategy usually differentiates here a lot. And I really hope that we get some entertainment with the cars being super close. But with that being said, let's go over my predictions. It's going to be very close here, so it's going to be very difficult to make these or get any right. But as always, we have the best, the worst, and the top 5 drivers. This is getting even more difficult now with Ferrari making such a huge step up. McLaren is close. Mercedes is hit or miss. Red Bull is pretty much back in the mix as well, and we know their track record here, which I do want to talk about when going over these best teams and worst teams. So let's start off with it. For the best teams, obviously those top 4 are a ways away from everybody else. I don't think that those cars have the necessary downforce to do well here. We did see RB last year, which was AlphaTauri at the time, do very well. It's possible that they could have a better race than usual. Coda wasn't too bad. If they can nail downforce, maybe. Aston's been pretty good in downforce levels as well in certain tracks, but yet again, it's a big green tractor and any upgrades that come to the car are downgrades, so I'm not expecting much from the green team. I think for the top 3, what we're going to go for is Red Bull being in P1, which has not been said for a very long time. I do think the car will perform very well here. I think Ferrari and McLaren are going to tie for P2, and I'm talking about literally not even a 10th difference between Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren. And I do think if Mercedes can nail a setup, they're splitting the upgrade package here. So I don't know how certain I am on them actually capitalizing, but I have those 3 out of the top 4, McLaren, Ferrari, and Red Bull, very close with Red Bull inching up at the top, specifically with Max. Then let's look at the worst teams. And I talked a lot about this. Alpine has a chance here, but their engine tends to blow up in these types of conditions. Sauber made a little bit of a step with Bottas. Yet again, the car is still atrocious, so I do not expect them to be anywhere better. They are always sitting at my P10. I might as well not even change the position or even talk about it. But then P9, P8, it's a toss-up, dude. Honestly, Aston has continuously shown us how they have not been able to improve their car a lot like the others and take steps up. Williams did it pretty good in Coda considering how bad it was in qualifying, so Williams is out of that discussion. I think RB has a chance as well. But Haas has shown to struggle in Mexico because of the conditions, and they do have a Ferrari engine. So I'm going to put Haas in P9, and I'm going to put Aston Martin in P8. I do think these 3 could be even solidified as the worst teams, especially here in Mexico. Lastly, the top 5 for this race. Who's going to finish in first? Who's going to finish in the top 5 in general? For this, I always go off of performance. I'm not going off of if there's DNFs or not. So I think in P5, we're going to get Lando Norris. I think it's not going to be his greatest GP. The pressure's high. He's got to nail it. I think this is where Lando's going to fall. In P4, I'm going to put Carlos Sainz. I think he's going to step up in that Ferrari, but he's not going to have as good of a GP as he did in Coda. This track doesn't really suit his driving style too well, but I still think he's going to perform well. In P3, I think we're going to see Oscar. He's had a couple of GPs that haven't been his best, but I think here we're going to see a rejuvenated Australian, and I fully expect him on the podium. In P2, Mr. Percival is not going to get P1, but P2 for him, and I think this is Max's redemption arc. He loves this track. He's phenomenal here. He's the tire whisperer of Mexico. I think he's getting P1. Checo's going to get P6, I think. I just think it's been a very unfortunate season for him. Max is going to take that P1 position, and I think he's going to cut the deal here when it comes between Lando and Max. It's already kind of been cut. I think Max Verstappen is going to show how good of a champion he is in P1. But I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Leave your top 5. It's honestly a toss-up between all of them. It could be even Ferrari up there. Maybe McLaren really makes that big of a jump again. They do supposedly have some upgrades coming, so we'll have to see. But leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Please leave a like and subscribe. It would mean the world. And peace.